Okay, so you want to buy a submarine. A real one, torpedo tubes, periscope, that long black hull sliding under the surface with you inside it. Of everything in this series, this is the machine people ask about most. And here is the strange part. You can buy a submarine. Retired ones have been sold to civilians for decades. What you cannot buy at any price is one that still works as a submarine. The problem is, what happens to a machine built to keep the ocean out the moment its crew stops fighting the ocean back? Why the most famous submarine in America needed a rescue costing tens of millions indoors? And why the boats bought as attractions keep ending up as scrap? Start with the rule that defines this entire market, because it is unique in our series. Every other machine we have covered, the tank, the jet, the warbird, can be owned in running condition by a private buyer. The submarine cannot. There are exactly 3 lanes into submarine ownership, and not one of them leads underwater. Lane 1 is the museum lane, the only lane with real military boats in it. Navies donate retired diesel submarines to museum organizations under the same free ship, you pay everything model we met in the carrier episode. Prove you can move it, berth it, and maintain it forever, and the boat is yours. Dozens of cities took the deal across the last half-century, which is why so many waterfronts have a black hull tied up beside the Maritime Museum. Lane 2 is the attraction lane, the ghost lane. In the 1990s, as the Soviet fleet dissolved, retired Soviet submarines were sold around the world to private operators with a simple pitch: park it downtown, charge admission. Boats crossed oceans to become tourist attractions in harbors that had never seen a periscope. Hold on to that lane. Its fate is the case study this whole episode builds to. And Lane 3 is the strange modern lane, the civilian submersible. Companies today build genuine, working, dive-capable personal submarines for the superyacht world. New hulls, priced from a few $1,000,000 into the tens of millions. They are real submarines in every engineering sense, and they are the only running option money can buy. But notice what they are not: military. The military boat that still dives is the one thing this market has never sold and never will, and the nuclear ones don't even reach the market as scrap. A reactor compartment is a national problem, not a listing. So the honest menu reads: a museum boat you steward, a tourist boat you gamble on, or a yacht toy you commission. 3 lanes. And every one of them runs straight into the same enemy, the one we cover next. For scale, the museum fleet worldwide numbers only in the dozens, a scattering of Second World War fleet boats across American waterfronts, a handful of Cold War diesels in Europe and Asia, the odd midget submarine in a gallery. Each one exists because a city at some point made the promise we described, and the fleet is not growing. Navies retire submarines constantly, but the donation pipeline has slowed to a trickle because the receiving side, the cities have watched what the promise costs. Every boat on display today is, in effect, grandfathered in from a more optimistic era, which makes each one simultaneously more precious and more precarious. Irreplaceable artifact, standing liability, same hull. Here is the first thing nobody tells you. When you buy a submarine, you inherit a war, one that has been running since the day the boat was launched, and one the Navy was quietly winning on your behalf until the moment of sale. The war is against the sea, and it is fought on 2 fronts. Front 1 is outside, saltwater versus steel, 24 hours a day, at the waterline where oxygen and salt collaborate. Every ship in this series fights that battle, but the submarine fights it with a special disadvantage. The hull is the machine. There is no superstructure that can rot while the important parts stay dry. The pressure hull, the exact steel that once held back the deep, is the artifact, the structure, and the liability, all in one curved plate. When surveyors measure a museum submarine, they measure hull thickness the way doctors measure blood pressure, and the readings only ever trend one direction. Front 2 is inside, and it surprises everyone. The boat rusts from within. A sealed steel tube breathes visitors' exhale. Weather seeps, condensation forms on every cold surface, and without constant dehumidification, the interior corrodes in the dark, while the outside gets all the paint. The navies fought this with crews and machinery running around the clock. You inherit the fight. The crew stays home. You also inherit the geometry. A submarine's interior is a confined space with essentially one path through it, which makes it a liability officer's longest night. Evacuation planning, visitor limits, hatch modifications, the very claustrophobia that sells the tickets writes the insurance policy. And you inherit immobility. A dead submarine moves the way a dead carrier moves, by heavy lift contract, at heavy lift prices, with underwriters supervising. Wherever you put it is, for economic purposes, forever. The daily defense, meanwhile, is fought by people you never see. Museum submarines run on volunteer crews of a very specific kind. Retired submariners who know the boat's dialect, divers who inspect the hull below the waterline for free, painters who spend Saturdays on staging over cold water. The sacrificial anodes, blocks of metal bolted to the hull, specifically to corrode instead of the steel, get inspected and replaced on a cycle, like oil changes for a building. The paint schedule never ends. Finish the stern and the bow is due. None of this appears on a ticket stub, and all of it is the reason there is still a boat to buy a ticket for. A hull that is also the exhibit, an interior that rusts from breath, a one-exit geometry, and a permanent address. That is the inheritance. Now the reason cities lined up to accept it anyway. Because here is where it gets genuinely interesting. Done right, a museum submarine is one of the highest performing artifacts per ton in the entire heritage world, and it earns in 4 layers. Layer 1 is the gate, supercharged by psychology. People do not line up to look at a submarine. They line up to go inside one to feel the closeness. Duck through the hatches. Stand where the torpedoman stood. That fascination with a shiver converts to admission tickets at a rate most exhibits only dream of, which is why the submarine is so often the museum's best-earning single object. Layer 2 is the overnight. Youth programs sleeping in real crew berthing are a signature submarine product. The bunks are genuine, the immersion is total, and the program fees stack across every season the calendar allows. Layer 3 is the screen. Directors need submarine interiors, and studios hate building them. The geometry is expensive to fake and impossible to fake well. A preserved boat with authentic compartments earns location fees from film, television, and documentary crews for whom the real thing is cheaper than the set. And layer 4 is the contrast lane earning in parallel, the luxury submersible world, where new civilian boats charter to expedition yachts and research programs. It is not your museum boat's revenue, but it proves the deeper point of this episode. People will always pay to go under the surface. The only question is whose hull survives the privilege. The overnight programs deserve their own line in the ledger, because they are the museum submarine's secret weapon. Scout troops and school groups sleep in the actual bunks, stand simulated watches, eat in the real galley, and get woken by a dive alarm at an hour their parents will hear about for weeks. The immersion cannot be faked and cannot be replicated on any other artifact, which is why the good programs run waiting lists measured in months and pricing that quietly outperforms daytime admission per square foot. Meanwhile, the film economy hums alongside. Every submarine movie ever made needed interiors, and directors pay real location fees for compartments that no set designer can convincingly fake. The claustrophobia, it turns out, is the product twice. 4 layers, riding on one psychological truth. The underwater world sells itself. So far, so brilliant. Now the number, the one that tells you what victory in this market actually costs. $35 million. That is the scale of money spent to save the most famous submarine in America, the U-505, the German U-boat captured at sea in 1944 and brought to Chicago as a trophy. Decades Outdoors were killing it, the way Decades Outdoors kill every submarine. So its museum did the only thing that actually wins the war against the sea. It removed the sea. The boat was lifted, moved, and entombed in a purpose-built, climate-controlled underground hull, a preservation project on the order of $35 million. Listen to that again, $35 million. Not to buy a submarine, the boat was already theirs. To park one indoors, the building cost more than warships do. And it was the second impossible move in this boat's American life. The first came in the 1950s, when the U-505 was originally brought to the museum, hauled out of the lake and dragged whole across a Chicago highway to the museum grounds, while enormous crowds gathered to watch a captured German U-boat cross the street. It remains one of the great logistics spectacles in museum history, and it established the pattern the 2000s move completed. This boat survives because twice in 1 century. Its keepers moved land and traffic rather than let the water keep its appointment. No other artifact in this series has been rescued at that scale twice. That is what total commitment to the corrosion war actually looks like. And it is, to date, the only strategy with a 100% success rate in this entire market. Now, flip the ledger over, because a submarine's costs compound in the dark. The hull survey first. Periodic thickness measurements over the whole pressure hull, because the steel thins silently, and the day it fails a survey is the day the asset becomes a removal problem. Then cathodic protection, the sacrificial systems that corrode on purpose so the hull corrodes slower, consumed, and replaced forever. Then the dehumidification war, air handlers, sealed sections, monitoring, power a utility bill that is actually a structural expense, because in this machine, dry air is load-bearing. Then the berth, pier fees, or the far larger one-time cost. The smart operators pay the dry dock or land berth that lifts the boat out of its enemy entirely. Then insurance, priced by that one exit geometry and every visitor who ducks through a hatch. And behind it all, the endgame line no budget wants to print. Removal. A submarine that fails at surveys does not get abandoned. It gets extracted by the same heavy-lift world that installed it at prices that have bankrupted the goodwill of more than one waterfront. The ledger's message is simple and absolute. The sea never stops billing. It only changes the invoice's name. Which brings us to the trap. The one an entire decade of buyers walked into with tickets already printed. The trap is the attraction submarine. In the 90s, it looked like found money. Soviet boats were suddenly for sale, real, storied, cinematic for less than a waterfront restaurant's fit-out. The pitch wrote itself. Tow it in, tie it up, sell tickets. And the first act always worked. Crowds came. Local news filmed a periscope against the skyline. For a few seasons, the numbers sang. The trap was the clock. The purchase price bought the boat. But the ticket revenue almost never funded the war, the surveys, the anodes, the dry air, the reserve for the dry dock that pierside boats need and attraction budgets ignore. So the boats aged in public, one skipped maintenance season at a time, gracefully at first, then visibly, then terminally. The trap in every episode of this series has the same skeleton, the entry price disguising the standing army the asset requires. But the submarine version is the purest, because the enemy is literally the parking spot. Tie a submarine in salt water and neglect it, and you have not paused its costs. You have compounded them into a single future bill called removal, addressed to whoever is standing there when the survey fails. And removal is its own dark art. A condemned submarine cannot simply be towed away like a barge. Often it can barely be moved at all. The options read like a demolition menu written by an insurance adjuster. Heavy lift cranes if the hull can take the slings, cutting in place if it cannot, with containment booms deployed and environmental monitors watching every torch cut over the water. Every step is permitted, supervised, and priced accordingly, which is why removal quotes so often exceed decades of the boat's earnings, and why they read like ransom notes. They are ransom notes. The sea takes hostages slowly, and the invoice always arrives addressed to the most recent name on the lease. And in San Diego, we know exactly who was standing there, because it happened in front of the whole city. Before the fall, the counterexample because this market's one perfect victory deserves its Taubman slot. The U-505 story is really two decisions, made half a century apart by people who understood the enemy. Decision 1. In the 1950s, Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry brought the captured U-boat ashore at all hauled out of the water and across land to the museum, a spectacle in itself, and crucially, an eviction of the sea from day one. The boat spent its first Chicago decades outdoors, but on land, half the war already won. Decision 2. In the 2000s, the museum acknowledged that outdoor land was only a truce. Weather is just the sea with better publicity, and executed the endgame. The $35 million lift into a climate-controlled underground hull, where temperature, humidity, and light are controlled like a bank vaults. Today, the U-505 is not surviving. It is finished fighting. It is the only large submarine on the continent whose maintenance plan does not include the word corrosion in its opening paragraph. The lesson costs $35 million and reads one sentence long. You do not preserve a submarine by maintaining it harder. You preserve it by firing the ocean. Stand in that Chicago hull today and you can feel what victory in this market costs. The temperature never moves. The humidity is held like a bank vault holds its air. The lighting is calibrated to reveal the boat without cooking its paint, and visitors walk beneath the keel beneath it on ramps that let them see a hull no enemy ever saw from that angle. The boat sits like a patient finally out of intensive care, stabilized, monitored, safe. It is the most expensive parking spot in the museum world, and the cheapest submarine to own on Earth, because its great enemy is on the other side of a wall. Every other boat in this episode is still in the ring. This one retired undefeated by leaving. Everyone who could afford that lesson thrived. And now, the boat that couldn't. Its name was B-39, a Soviet Foxtrot class attack submarine, one of the big diesel boats built to shadow Western fleets. After the Cold War, it crossed the ocean to San Diego, tied up on the waterfront as a star attraction of the Maritime Museum. A real Soviet submarine, hatches open, in an American harbor. And for years it worked. Visitors filed through by the hundreds of thousands. The boat did everything an attraction submarine is supposed to do, except the one thing no attraction submarine has ever done, which is out-earn the sea. Pierside. In saltwater, the Foxtrot aged the way the ledger said it would. Surveys found the hull thinner each cycle, sections closed to visitors, the maintenance estimate and the revenue line drifted apart, year after year, in public view. By the 2020s, the arithmetic was undeniable, and in 2022, the museum did the only solvent thing left. The B-39 was sold for scrap and towed away to be cut up. 30 years, roughly, from crowd puller to cutting torch. Nobody was villainous. Nobody was even wrong. Exactly, the museum got decades of value from the boat, but the ending was written the day the mooring lines went on. A submarine kept in the sea is a countdown, and the countdown does not care how good the exhibit is. Those who watched the B-39's final decade describe a long goodbye conducted in public. Compartments roped off one by one as surveys condemned them. Volunteers painting whatever could still be reached. A maintenance of appearances more than steel. The gift shop still selling postcards of a boat that could no longer safely host the crowds on the postcards. And at the end, a tow watched from the shoreline by the same people who had once queued to go aboard the exhibit, leaving the way exhibits never should, at the end of a rope, bound for torches. Nobody had done anything wrong except keep a submarine in the sea, which, this market keeps insisting, is the one thing you cannot do to a submarine forever. The city watched a warship that survived the Cold War lose, in slow motion, to its own parking spot. So who wins with submarines? Line them up and the survivors rhyme in one specific way. They all change the boat's relationship with water. The indoor boats, the U-505 model, won outright. No sea, no war, just curation. The land-berthed and dry-berthed boats hauled out, cradled, displayed high and dry, won the affordable version of the same victory. Weather remains, but the great enemy is fired. The endowed fleet boats, the well-funded museum submarines, still afloat, survive by treating the ledger with religious seriousness. Surveys on schedule, anodes on schedule, a dry dock reserve that is actually funded. It is the hardest path, and the honest ones admit it is a holding action. And in the other lane entirely, the submersible builders thrive by selling hulls, young, new boats, modern materials. Owners with yacht budgets proof that running submarine and civilian owner can coexist, just never with a military boat. The pattern across all of them is the thesis of this episode, wearing 4 costumes. Nobody beats the sea. The winners are simply the ones who stopped playing. So, does owning a submarine actually work? Here is the good year. Your boat sits high and dry in its land berth hauled out a decade ago, the single best check the board ever wrote. The queue to go aboard wraps around the plaza, the overnight program is booked 2 seasons deep, and a streaming production just paid location fees to shoot in the real control room for a week. The survey came back boring, which is the most beautiful word in submarine ownership. The boat earned, the reserve grew, and the sea watched from 30 feet away, unpaid. That year is real, at the well-run boats. Now here is the other year. Your boat floats, because floating photographed better in the brochure. The thickness survey came back with red numbers in the ballast sections. The insurer wants 2 compartments closed to visitors. The 2 best ones in the dry dock quote reads like a ransom note because it is 1. Pay or begin pricing removal. Ticket revenue covers the pumps and the paint and not $1 of the countdown. The board meets monthly now. The agenda never changes. That year is also real, and in San Diego it ran for a decade before the cutting torches ended it. Same fascination, same cues, once. The difference was never the submarine. It was the water, and whether the owner ever truly got the boat out of it. Because that is the truth at the bottom of this market. A submarine only ever had one enemy that mattered: the sea it lived in. The Navy fought that enemy every single day, with a crew of 80 and a nation's budget, and called it routine. Buy the boat, and the sea does not know the war ended. It keeps attacking the hull, from outside and from within, on schedule, forever. And now the entire defense budget is you. A submarine's whole job was to disappear. Own one carelessly, and it will keep that promise slowly, pierside, in public, and take your money down with it.